Hey guys, Charlie Murphy here, record another session of $1, $2, 6 max, no limit hold'em on Ignition regular tables. Our games are up and running, so let's jump right in. Tag this player as a recreational player based on the fact that he's limped and he's playing on a shorter stack. Lower right-hand table, we can open King 7 suited from middle position. Lower right-hand table looks pretty good with a couple of players I've already tagged as suspected wrecks and a third player playing on a 60 blind stack. We'll check in against a couple of recreational player limps and a small blind complete in our big blind with 10-6 offsuit. I'm also going to go ahead and tag this under the gun player as a wreck. We were already pretty sure based on his shorter stack, and we've seen him limp as well, so I think it's going to be safe to go ahead and conclude that that guy is in fact a fish or a wreck. Flop checks around, turn is the king. We've got that third pair right here. I'm going to go ahead and start stabbing pretty wildly with nobody showing any interest in that pot thus far. Also protects my hand's equity from random overcards that don't want to put any money in but could in fact go ahead and hit a better card. On the river, I don't see much merit in trying to bluff him off a better pair, nor do I see any merit in trying to get value from a worse hand. I'm going to go ahead and check and hope we can just check this down for free. Upper left-hand table, we've got a cutoff open. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet the button pretty aggressively, roughly a 13% range. Of course, pocket aces is a part of that. On the upper right-hand table, we're going to be 3-betting a button open also quite aggressively, about a 15% range. 9-8 suited will be in there, though probably one of the worst hands in our range. Mostly going to have, you know, mid pairs, maybe fives or better, small to medium pairs, fives or better, suited broadways, suited 9x, any suited ace-x hand, ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, and maybe 9-8 suited. Upper left-hand table, we face a 4-bet from the cutoff after we 3-bet. I like to go ahead and trap with the aces quite a bit for a 4-bet just because it's going to play so strong. Against the player pool will be a bit tighter than what a solver might recommend, but I'm probably going to go ahead and flat here with like queens through nines and a couple of suited Broadway cards like ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, and of course aces as a trap. Not the best flop for us, having it come down monotone diamonds without us having a diamond. He bets into us. I think what we want to do is go ahead and ship this in, just because I can get called down by overpairs, especially overpairs with the diamond that I'm well ahead of. I can look like I have a naked ace of diamonds that's doing this. I don't really have any offsuit hands in my range pre-flop, but he doesn't know that. I really don't want to let another diamond peel off and put me in bad shape. Upper right-hand table, we open the button with queen 7 of diamonds. We got an 8-7-7 monotone board. We got called off by king jack, you know, no pair, king of diamonds, which I think is a pretty good result for us, even though we got outdrawn. We got check raised over here when we've got the trip 7s on that 8-7-7 monotone flop after range betting small. We're going to go ahead and just flat our entire continue range, including the trip 7s, Not the best card in the turn, but we're still not too terribly worried about him having specifically 6-9 or 6-4 to having outdrawn us, so I'm still going to feel like my trip 7s are pretty good. We're going to go ahead and call again. On the turn, we could be calling with any of our backdoor heart draws we floated the flop check raise with. A hand like 9-10 is still going to be in there. We've, of course, got all kinds of overpairs, all kinds of trips on our full houses, so we're still very protected and very strong in a lot of ways. River a 6, so any kind of 9x hand got there, which would give him the straight on that 4 straight run out. Not the cleanest run out for our hand. I probably check this back if he checks to me, thinking I don't know what he really puts in a check call line there that we beat. Now we have a bit of a decision here with the board running out so scary, as that's a pretty tough board for players to find bluffs on in a lot of cases. I'm going to take a look at some statistics. He's betting 29 into 47. He's betting about 60% pot. In the check raise bet line, see how bluffy that is. That's probably about a neutral line, and we're still pretty strong. That 4 straight river is a little bit under bluffed. The paired flop is slightly over bluffed. This is actually pretty close at this point, but I'm going to go ahead and call it down. If it was a bit bigger, he might be able to move me off it. For that sizing, I think I need to go ahead and call, but it's close. And he's got Queen Jack, just a triple barrel overcard. I don't mind his flop check raise, I suppose, given that he's got overcards, a backdoor flush draw, and I'm likely pretty weak. I don't know that I continue barreling on the turn there if I'm him. Upper left-hand table, we get ace-king suited opens for middle position. The cutoff flats us. I button, goes ahead in 3 bets. Really nothing else to do here but 4 bet and call off with queens plus and ace-king. So that's what we're going to do. We can use ace-queen offsuit as our bluff. Probably find a few cold calls in there for that sizing, but not too many with a 3-bet in position and a player cold calling in between us still to act that could either call or jam over the top. We get flatted. We get a queen queen jack 2-tone board. We have the backdoor flush draw. Our ace queen bluff did get there. Ace king is actually our worst hand right now. I am going to go ahead and range bet this, even with that queen out there probably being a bit stronger for the in-position player. I could be perceived as having jacks full as well, even though I probably don't actually have it. I could certainly have quad queens or ace queen and the overpairs, and then ace king is my only hand that really hasn't connected with the board. When he goes all in, though, I think it's going to be okay to fold this. As I said, that is in fact my worst hand, as I've got aces, kings, ace queen, quad queens, and maybe even some jacks full, although probably not too much of that. We can go ahead and fold this. Talking a bit more about that 4-bet hand with the aces where I flatted pre-flop earlier, seeing him show up there with king jack offsuit in that 4-bet pot. Had I just jammed over the top like I would with, ace king, pocket queens, those kind of hands, it lets him get away. By putting the aces in that flatting range, it forces him to get to the flop, where even when he flops a board that's pretty damn good for him, where he's got 3 diamonds on the board, and he's got the king of diamonds in his hand, and I have no diamonds, he still ends up getting his money in, calling his money off behind, drawing to just the flush draws. Neither his king nor his jack were live in and of themselves, so the aces, even in a spot that's pretty bad for me when I go ahead and flat that, it lets him keep his stupid 4-bet bluffs that probably shouldn't have even been in his range in the first place if he's doing that with a hand like king-jack offsuit in there, and lets him make another mistake post-flop as well. So even though we got stacked and got outdrawn in that hand, I'm pretty happy about the way we played it and pretty happy about the situation that we put him in. And that's why aces can be a pretty good pre-flop trap in some of those 4-bet pot situations. Upper right-hand table, we can fold Jack-8 suited from the small blind against a button open, slightly too weak to 3-bet. Lower right-hand table, ace-queen offsuit's a fine standard button open, of course. A couple recreational players in the blinds. We don't mind if we get into a pot with one or both of them as well. They both come along and call. Jack 7-3 rainbow board. We get let into for half pot by a player that's probably pretty weak and fishy, and then overcalled by the big blind, another player that's probably weak and fishy. We're getting great pot odds. We've got 2 overcards, some backdoor gut shot type hands. I'm going to go ahead and float this at least once and see what happens. If I peel an ace or a queen, I'm going to feel like my hand is pretty good, especially against the short stack. Now when the small blind goes ahead and jams for 3.5x pot into 2 players, and I'm still sitting on just ace high, I'm of course going to go ahead and fold that one out. But I don't mind the float, looking to get in there and peel an overcard against a player who's probably going to do wacky, spazzy things, such as, you know, 3x or 4x overbet jam the turn all in into 2 players with uncapped ranges. Or at least my range is uncapped. I can't speak for the big blind, but my range is still has plenty of strong hands in it there. Upper left-hand table, we have a presumed recreational player limp under the gun with 40 blinds. We're going to go ahead and isolate him with something like our middle position RFI range, a low 20s, probably a 21, 22% range. Ace-King offsuit, of course, is a part of that. The big blind goes ahead and calls, and the recreational player calls as well. We have an 8-5-4 rainbow board. Given that it's multi-way and so-coordinated, I'm not going to use a range bet, and I'm not going to bet a hand like ace-king high. I can peel aces or kings after checking back that still want to get some value in later. I have a smidge of showdown value if this board keeps checking around. There's just no reason to bet. I want to be betting my stronger hands, like my sets, of course. I don't really have any straights. I don't think I isolate with 6-7 suited too much, but I definitely have the sets, most of the sets. I've got, on the flop, I've got lots of overpairs and a few 8x type pairs. I've got ace-8, king-8. I can be betting those kind of hands. And then I can also be betting some 7x type hands to the extent I have them, 6x and 7x gut shots. And I'll fold when I don't hit any card that improves me and there's some action going on in the turn. Upper right-hand table, we open Jack-8 suited on the cutoff, which is standard, and we're going to go ahead and check range to the in-position caller on the Queen 6-4 rainbow board. There's actually a decent number of backdoor outs for me here, and this player seems loose, aggressive, and uses a small size. You know, the 7's a good card, the 5's a good card, 9s and 10s all give me gut shots, diamonds all give me backdoor straight draws. I'm going to go ahead and take a stab at him here and check raise, especially with that smaller size, which is not necessarily particularly strong. My jack blocks some queen jack that could be in his range that would actually be a hand that could call pre-flop and go ahead and bet small and call the check raise. Not guaranteed this works. It definitely doesn't work all the time, but it works a decent period of the time, and I can certainly keep barreling on diamonds, especially those diamonds that give me some gut shots. So I think it's okay to try to check raise this guy here. I like that better than check calling, that's for sure. I could also be check raising various sets, 6s, 4s, queens as well. I'd probably even check raise queens against that small sizing. I can have some hands like 7-8. I can have some hands like King Jack, King 10, Jack 10 with backdoor flush draws that have good removal to the queen as well. You know, Jack 8's a bit looser, so I guess I've got a few better check raise bluff candidates, but I don't mind taking a stab with the Jack 8 there as well. I think it's pretty reasonable. If you were to just go ahead and check fold it, I think that's okay too. But I think the check raise is a reasonable thing to try in that spot. When we, of course, get 3-bet, we're going to just go ahead and fold out, though, without too much going for us. Upper right-hand table, king, queen suited, and standard open for middle position. Now we get 3-bet in position. I'm going to defend these pretty tightly, not call a whole lot when I get 3-bet by in-position players. Here it's about a 3x sizing. You know, a solver would certainly call this hand, and even though I get a bit tighter because the pool doesn't 3-bet quite enough, this guy's been active pre-flop. He hasn't 3-bet yet, but he has been active otherwise, and even against the pool in general, I can go ahead and continue with this hand. So I'm going to go ahead and call. We get an ace-6-8 board. I think I will once again be using this for a check raise, especially against a small sizing, given that I've got good removal to his ace-king or ace-queen type hands, and I've got backdoor flush draws, backdoor gut shots. When he checks and I peel the king, now I beat everything but the ace. I don't see too much merit in trying to blowing him off an ace in the 3-bet pot, nor do I see a lot of merit in trying to get a ton of value from a hand like pocket jacks, pocket tens, maybe pocket queens if he has those. I block it somewhat, but he could also have it. The 10 isn't a great card in that now pocket 10's got there. I guess my question is going to be, do I try to get value from the king or not? I think I'm going to be better served to check this, but it's pretty close. My aces I would certainly be betting. I'll show down with the king. Lower left-hand table, blind on blind, we open pocket kings, got called by the big blind. We're going to check range on that 10-8-4 flop. This guy's been very loose pre-flop, playing 88-0 with 80% limps over 5 hands, so I think he's probably going to be very prone to stacking off too lightly in a one-pair, with a one-pair hand in a blind situation. I'm going to go ahead and check raise the kings as opposed to check calling, given that I think this player can pay me off a bit too lightly, and there's also plenty of draws we can either rep or charge. We get called, the 3 of spades peels off. I don't want to check and give a free card. What I want to do here is use a very small sizing on that flush closing turn. He's not going to fold anything like a 10x, especially with the spade, but I can get some value from hands that I beat. And I don't want to let him check back and get a free card there. He quickly calls with the ace peeling off now, and now I just want to go ahead and check and try to let him show down a 10. Upper left-hand table I can squeeze against the under the gun open and the middle position recreational player that's calling. When the player now goes ahead and bets me half pot on the river, I've got a decision to make because this is such a weird line. We're going to consider him a fish, blind on blind, pre-flop caller. He went bet, call, call, bet. The bet, call, call, bet line is pretty underbluffed, even though this particular sizing is very overbluffed. Let me take a look. What about a flush closing turn? A flush closing turn is also a little bit underbluffed. This is pretty close. Up the upper left-hand table when the check raise with no spade, I just get out of that pot. This is pretty close. I mean, he could have actually some whip straight draws. When it's close, I call, especially against a rec. And he's doing that with a weak 10, which doesn't make any sense, but these guys do things that don't make sense all the time. So you don't want to be folding hands with showdown value, especially when you're getting such a good price. Lower right-hand table, we checked around the flop after raising first in from middle position. We now have top pair with the weak kicker on that coordinated board, plus one of the flush draws in our hand as well, so we go ahead and start betting that out. Upper right-hand table, we're checking range in the blind battle in the 10-9-3. We'll probably just check fold this. And I do want to see what that player had in that 3-bet pot a couple of hands ago when we checked the king-queen hand all the way down. He had 10 jack of hearts, so perhaps I could have gotten some value from him. I don't know why he didn't stab at that on the flop. You know, he also had a backdoor flush draw and various backdoor straight draws and no real showdown value. He really should have bet the flop. Granted, I was going to check raise him. Maybe he knew that was coming, so he just wanted to play more cautiously. But this guy, you know, my assessment that he's reasonably active is seeming to check out so far, at least pre-flop. And this guy, as we know, he's a rep. We can go ahead and tag him as such. I'm going to go ahead and take a stab with this 8 high in this multi-way pot where nobody's shown any initiative so far, and ace probably bets somewhere along the line. I'm really just trying to get past a queen for the most part. But I really don't want to check down 8 high as well. Got called by pocket threes, which is a little loose, but he's a fun player, a recreational player, so we can't be too surprised. 2.5x open from under the gun. We're in the big blind. You could 3-bet this, but I actually like to call ace-queen offsuit in this formation a lot more than 3-bet it just because the players tend to be a bit tight when they open from under the gun. If there was a caller in there and this was a squeeze spot, I would put that hand into the squeeze range instead, as it plays a lot better heads up than multi-way. I don't want to call and take a multi-way flop with ace-queen off. I'd rather squeeze that. Heads up, I think it's okay to flat call, especially against an earlier position raise for a 2.5x open. Now he bets about two-thirds into that pot. We've got ace high. We've got a backdoor ace high with the backdoor flush draw. I think it's okay to continue this. It's probably on the cusp of hands that we would call for that size, and we don't really want to start calling things too much weaker than that. And now when we peel that heart there, the only question is, do I go ahead and bluff this, or do I just try to showdown my ace-queen high, especially when that board pairs? I think there's a decent bit of showdown value. I think with the ace-10, which I could also have, I would go ahead and turn that into a bluff. Ace-queen, I'm just going to try to showdown, actually. I don't think he's really going to fold the 9 there for one barrel as played, so I think it's okay to turn that into some showdown value, a showdown value type hand, because it does have an awful lot of showdown value. You know, we pretty much beat everything except a pair like, 8-9, maybe some kind of middle pair that bet the flop and starts checking back, and those don't really fold the river for the most part. So I might bet the weaker ace-10 hands or any other weird kind of on-paired high card floats, though I probably don't have too many for that flop sizing. But whatever my weakest ones are, I'll use those as the bluffs on the river. Ace-queen, yeah, ace-queen is going to beat most of his ace-high, everything except ace-king, which probably also doesn't fold, all things considered. But those weaker, especially the non-ace-high high card hands, to whatever extent I have them, and my weaker ace-high floats like ace-10 with the ace of hearts, that would be a good hand to go ahead and bluff. If I am going to bluff, given that heart peels off on the turn, I'm probably going to bluff for an overbet. I'm probably going to, only be betting hearts or, flushes that I make there on the turn that check through for overbet sizes or other similarly strong hands. I'm not going to be betting too many weakish one-pair 9x type hands for value in that spot. So it's pretty much going to be flushes, or maybe if I've got some trips types hands instead. So I use the overbet size for those, and I'll also use overbets for my bluffs, ideally a hand like ace-10 with the ace of hearts blocker. I think that's a good way to play that river. Lower right-hand table, we checked range. It checks around. We're going to go ahead and stab at this with nobody showing any interest in it yet. Our queen probably isn't really good as a gut shot anymore just because people are probably calling with some kind of 10 or ace instead. I am now just going to go ahead and check the king high and hope he lets me check down with some kind of weaker hand. Not sure why these guys would call with the weaker hand than king high on the turn just to check it down on the river, but as I say all the time, these recreational guys do all kinds of weird, wacky things. He called with king high with the 7 kicker, so not too terribly unreasonable if he's going to be in there on the pre-flop with that. I don't know. There still might be some merit in the bluff in that. I guess it's close. Lower left-hand table, we're going to open blind on blind with Jack-10. Lower right-hand table, this rec min raises our 2.5x open, so we're going to go ahead and call pretty much everything that we don't 4-bet. We also got the overcaller back here from the big blind, but we're still going to go ahead and call. Blind on blind, lower left-hand table, we're going to check range on 6-7 deuce two-tone. And now that the turn hits, we're going to go ahead and start overbetting because we've got a flush draw. I'd be overbetting my sets, my good ace-x and 2-pair type hands, as well as my good straight draws like 8-9 and most of my flush draws. And against this action over here with the check and the check raise, I'm just going to go ahead and fold my gut shot. Upper right-hand table, king-queen is going to be an open on the cutoff, a very standard open for a 2.5x size. Upper right-hand table is not particularly fishy. The player right directly after me has been reasonably active, somewhat aggressive. I think we can go ahead and shuffle that table out. Upper left-hand table also seems to be pretty reg-heavy as well. We can look for a better table than that. We played a few orbits and let them kind of show themselves. The lower right-hand table has at least one recreational player. The player to the right of me may very well be as well. We'll keep that one. Lower left-hand table has that rec we were in the blind battle with the kings not too long ago. This player directly across from me, short stack, pre-flop limps, very wide VPIP, 59% VPIP, only 18 pre-flop raise over 18 hands. Probably pretty safe to tag him as a recreational player as well. This player does have a limp, but I don't recall seeing it. He probably limped behind a limper. He's only limped once. He's otherwise playing 30-26, very aggressive reg-type stats. I'm not going to suspect he's a fish based on one limp with the full stack. When there's other fish, he may have limped behind. We'll keep an eye on it and see if he does anything else weird or starts limping more often. But as of now, I'm not going to call that guy a recreational player quite yet. But there are other recs at the table, which make it a good table to be at least for the moment. We'll look for a table with some obvious short stacks in play before we decide to sit down at one, or take a few chances at finding a table with some obvious short stacks before at least take a few chances at one of those and give up if we can't find one after a minute or two. But we're going to try a couple of times to find a table that looks better at first glance. Got a shorter player over there. The player that's deep, we have immediate position on. If we get deep, that could be put us in some fun spots later on too. So we'll keep this table for now. Upper right-hand table, we raise middle position. We get called in position by a weak player, get called in the small blind or by a weak player, and then we get re-raised by the big blind, about a 5x size. It's not too large a size given the two overcalling players out there. We're getting exactly 2-1 on our call. However, I don't really love calling with these other players out there. Although this guy is probably pretty weak and will play pretty transparently and poorly, I've got a hand that'll play well, and this guy is so short it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and defend this a little on the loose side. I end up getting position against this guy anyway. And that doesn't give the under the gun or the big blind a chance to reopen the actions. We're just going to go ahead and call in position. If he bets, we can fold out, although he should play pretty transparently now with this all-in player up here ahead of us. I have no reason to float him lightly, even for a smaller bet size, given that this player is all in and he should not be as bluff-heavy. He bets me small, which actually makes this a bit closer. Even the pre-flop call was probably a little on the loose side by me. I was trying to get in there with the fish, and I was getting a decent price. I got the backdoor flush draw. We're still pretty deep. There's no reason to think he's got any kind of set or quad hand right now, so I'm going to call him one more time here with all that money left behind. Now we actually chop against ace-king, so any of these, he also probably shouldn't be too likely to keep barreling with total air with that fish shot there. So I think I have a decent chance of getting this to showdown, and I only lose if he's got an overpair right now. So I think we're in an okay spot. And if I happen to have a hand like quad sevens, I would have played it this exact same way, or any kind of 7x. I would have just flatted the flop and I would have checked back the turn, just looking to under-rep my hand. This is more likely to be an overpair going for value than a player trying to fold me off a chop with ace high, I think. I can't guarantee that for sure, but I think I've gone far enough with this hand and it's time to fold, especially with this guy out here. It's not like he really needs to be value betting. He could be making a play at the side pot. I can't know that for sure. But I think the play here is fold. You know, there's just going to be too many overpairs in his range that he's doing this with just to get a bit more value off. So I'm going to go ahead and make that fold. And he hit the jack, so I like his river value bet, trying to get hero called for a small bet right there. I think he played that hand reasonably well. And I think I also played it reasonably well. I guess the decision is maybe I can go ahead and fold it pre-flop. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think it's pretty close. I think post-flop was done correctly. This table looks pretty reg happy at this point. I'm going to go ahead and keep trying to shuffle that one out. Lower right-hand table, we've got 10-9 in the cutoff. Upper left-hand table, 8-5, or upper right-hand table rather, 8-5 suited is a bit outside of standard button open for me, but pretty close. We don't know anything about these players yet in our first orbit, but the pool tends to be a bit too passive. They don't necessarily fold too much from their blinds, but they don't re-raise quite enough, so we can expand our range absent a reason not to, and a hand like 8-5 suited is not a very far expansion or deviation from a standard play anyway, so I think that's fine to do. Lower right-hand table, we get called by the big blind. We've got a queen 8-3 two-tone board. We're going to go ahead and range bet. And we're going to continue barreling quite a few turn cards as we've got a gut shot. You know, a 6 or a 7 gives us either an open-ender or a double gut shot. The jack gives us the nuts. We are going to fold 8-5 suited against the small blind 3-bet. Now we get 3-bet, we get check raised in the lower right-hand table by the big blind, a pretty decent size. He looks like it's about a 2/3 to 3/4 type size. I'm going to go ahead and float this. I'd much rather do it if I had backdoor flush draw or flush draw in some way, but I'm going to go ahead and float these check raises pretty aggressively, especially as we've got some other ways out of this hand aside from just the jack. We can pick up extra equity on that 7 or the 6. Blind on blind, upper left-hand table, we're just going to flat defend with the 7s. We're not going to 3-bet. I think it's a little bit too low to 3-bet. Probably 3-bet 9s are better. Probably call 8s and lower. And against the second barrel on there, without having picked up more equity, I'm going to go ahead and fold the gut shot now. I'm going to call the flop continuation bet, that roughly 2/3 bet with 7s on the 9-6 deuce rainbow flop. The new table is heads up, but against a player who's buying in short, so I'll stick around and see if other recs fill in, or a suspected rec wants to play me heads up for a little bit. We get a second barrel, about 60% of the pot. I'm going to go ahead and call that second barrel with the pocket 7s. I guess he could have 9x, or he could have some kind of trip deuces, or even like 6s full kind of hand that he keeps betting right there. But you know, that board's staying low. It's hard for him to hit a lot. He has a lot of weird whiffed overcards. I am going to happily check back my pocket 7s right now. He could have also had backdoor club draws he kept barreling with. He had ace-4, so he was just doing that with hands without a ton of actual equity, which is why I don't want to go away that easily, just because he barrels me a couple of times. I'm going to go ahead and jab the heads up here with my third pair after he limps pre-flop and checks back the flop on the ace-king-5 board. Mostly just doing this to try to send his equity to 0, send weird kind of cards like 8-10 with no real draw, just get them to fold out. Now, however, that it's 4 to the straight, I don't really like my hand short on value nearly as much. I'm going to turn it into a bluff, and I'm going to bluff for pot with it. I do, in fact, block 3-6, the absolute nut straight as well, which gives me a bit more bluffing value, though probably not a ton extra. A lot of times he's just got weird whiffed gut shots or flush draws that fold out that I was beating anyway, but I do fold out some king X or maybe even some ace X on occasion, which is not the worst thing in the world either. You know, we're going to raise our button in this heads-up spot here against the half stack with our ace-king suited. Probably playing like a 75 or 80% range against that shorter stack. I don't really know exactly how heads-up works, to be perfectly honest. I'm not going to open 9-4, though. Upper left-hand table, 2.5x open from the button. We're going to go ahead and defend with the queen-jack offsuit. Now this particular board, I don't have a lot of strong hands, as I'm going to have 3-bet pre-flop with my 9s, my 8s, and my 9-8 suited for the most part. I will have 9-8 offsuit. I will have pocket 3s, so I do have some strong hands. Then he goes and bets me small as well, which makes me want to actually go ahead and check raise a bit more often. Given that I've got, I think I might want to check raise with my smaller straight draws. Although I don't really have too much 6-7. I've got some 7-10. I'm going to go ahead and check raise this one. Lower right-hand table, blind, small blind limps. We isolate up, raise up with pocket kings. We get a 6-4 deuce two-tone board. He checks, and we go ahead and range bet small and take it down. Had this guy bet a healthier size, half pot, 2/3, 3/4, something like that, I think I would have just check called with my gut shot, you know, one straight diamond and 2 overcards. Against the small size, he's going to have a lot more weak hands that just can't stand up to the check raise, and I can just check raise him off those. King-queen offsuit, probably a bit too weak to 3-bet against an under-the-gun open, so I'm just going to go ahead and fold that. It's probably pretty close, but a bit outside the range of what I'd recommend you 3-bet with. Blind on blind, lower left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and check range out of position on the king, deuce, two-tone board. Planning to mostly check call with my pocket 3s. That overbet is awfully suspect, though. I'm actually going to go ahead and fold just because there's not a lot of great runouts for this particular hand. He might just be doing that with the king already. I don't know that he's particularly spazzy, and when these fish bet large, it's usually a lot stronger. Lower right-hand table, we get 3-bet. Player's been reasonably active so far, though he hasn't 3-bet. I'm just going to use ace-queen as my bluff to go to balance out my kings plus ace-queen suited and some combos of queens and ace-king offsuit that 4-bet to get it in, and he folds quickly. Lower right-hand table, we're going to raise first in with pocket kings for middle position. Open in a low 20% range in that spot, probably about 22%. Pocket kings, of course, very clearly in that range. Heads up table, we're going to open king 9 offsuit from our button, and we're going to go ahead and bet him small on the 8-5-4 two-tone board. We get instantly called. I would be betting some low spades and some high spades here, but I'm going to be checking back my spades with some weak showdown value like 8x and 5x with the spade, and I'm also going to check back my naked middle type spades like king 9 offsuit with the 9 of spades, just so I've got some middling spades that can call on a smaller pot on the river if it gets to me. Here this player checks again. We lose to ace-king, the ace, the king, the queen, or the jack of spades. We can get called by some worse spades or perhaps even some non-spade hands. This one's pretty close between checking and betting, but I think he probably will call me with some hands like 5-6 with the spade, 8-7 with the spade, or maybe even some one-pair hands. So I'm going to go ahead and bet this. Plus, I'm also going to be bluffing pretty heavy with all my non-spade hands that couldn't barrel the turn and just got there on the river with no showdown value. So I like trying to get a bit thinner value, especially against a player who I think is kind of weak and fishy that will call me. He called me with pocket sevens with the 7 of spades, which is actually a pretty reasonable bluff catcher right there. But the idea is I can certainly actually get called by worse, even though my hand is somewhat marginal, so I want to be going for thin value whenever I can. Now he limps his button against me. I'm going to go ahead and raise him up with pocket 8s. It's probably about the bottom of my pair raising range. I think I would check in 7s and below. Maybe I'd raise 7s in a heads-up situation. Hard to say. I'm going to range bet small on this ace-king-jack two-tone board. I'll probably not put too much money in after this if he calls me, but if he's got weird random middling cards with nothing going for him, I can take that pot down right away before it gets a little bit scarier or before he decides to start bluffing me off my hand. We're going to raise ace-jack offsuit against the recreational player in our heads-up table on our button. We get called. Probably be looking for 3 streets of value on this ace-8-6 rainbow flop, depending on how the board runs out. But a lot of them are going to be looking to go bet, 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 and try to get a stack probably. We're going to start out by range betting him small. The king does not change very much for me. I'm trying to decide if there's any merit towards overbetting. Probably a small overbet. If I make it about 10 blinds, that's going to put 27 in the pot on the river with 34 behind. I think I want to overbet to about that size and plan to jam him all in on a lot of different rivers. Using a roughly geometric growth of pot type sizing there, using a smaller overbet than I would against a full stack player because he doesn't have as much behind him. I don't need to use as large a turn bet to threaten his entire stack in a reasonable fashion. Upper right-hand table, the button opens. We're going to 3-bet aggressively from the small blind, roughly a 15% range, including ace-king suited. Heads-up table, we're going to open ace-10 offsuit on our button. Lower left-hand table is now multi-way with all short stacks. We're going to go ahead and open ace-jack from our button, probably a 45% open range. Upper right-hand table, we're going to 3-bet this guy again, this time more like a 13% range in the button versus cutoff raise first in formation. Ace-queen suited is certainly going to be a part of that, and he folds again quickly. This guy seems like he's probably on the loose side pre-flop, 38-31 over the first couple of orbits. Too early to say that for sure, but it certainly looks that way. More information will tell us one way or the other, but as of right now, I might think he's probably got a lot of extra hands in his range pre-flop that can't stand up to the pre-flop 3-bets. Lower left-hand table, we have a recreational player. He either posted or limped. I couldn't tell for sure. We checked in with ace-7 offsuit. On the 5-4 deuce, rainbow board against the pot bet. I'm just going to go ahead and check fold. I don't really love a lot of the runouts, even the ones that improve my hand. The 3 gives me a straight, but it's the low end. The ace gives me top pair, but there's 4 to the straight. Even the 7 is most likely good, but you can't be too sure. And I'm check calling there to check call with a lot of marginal type draws, and most of the cards don't help me at all. So I'm just going to get out a bit earlier as opposed to a bit later. Upper right-hand table, we opened Queen Jack suited from middle position. Took it down, nothing more to talk about there. We're not going to 3-bet this small blind, or from the small blind against this button min raise from a short stack with King 10 offsuit. $3x open from a button, a suspected recreational player on the button as he's playing 57-14 over 7 hands. We weren't even going to defend this. We're now going to be in a cold 4-bet or fold scenario after the small blind 3-bets, and 6-7 offsuit, of course, is very clearly not in consideration for a cold 4-bet. So we just fold it. Lower left-hand table full of short-stacked reks. For the most part, we're going to open the King-Jack offsuit on the button for 2.5x, a standard open size. Upper left-hand table I'm going to shuffle out as it seems to be all regs, and there's softer games, softer tables to play at right about now from what I've seen from these other tables. There's another suspected rek on the upper right-hand table playing 38-0 over 16 hands on a 53 blind stack. Lower left-hand table, we're not going to range bet should it check to us on ace-7-4 because it's multi-way. I don't have a whole lot going on for this hand. No backdoor flush draw, just kind of a weak backdoor gut shot. I think betting this hand makes, I'm going to be betting far too many. I'm happy to check this one back. Be betting my aces, my 7s, my 4s, my ace-7, my ace-4. If I've got some 7-4 suited, I'd bet that. I'll bet my ace-king, my ace-queen. Ace-jack, ace-10. Probably start splitting my aces and check back some of the weaker top pair of aces to get some value on later streets or in deuce. I'd be bluffing with hearts, a hand like 5-6 suited, a lot of my 6-8, or even 8-5 suited type gut shot hands. However, now that everybody checks around twice, I am going to start stabbing. I've also got that diamond blocker for the backdoor diamond draw should that peel off. I think it's okay to start betting here. I am not giving this guy credit for a heart draw. I was going to bluff him had he checked to me. When he donks the river into me small, there might be some merit in finding some bluff raises against a fish here. Let me see here. How do fish tend to play in where they go check, check, call, and then they donk the river? The check, check, call, donk the river for this small size is by and large pretty weak. If I had a heart blocker, I think I would be shipping him in, especially a large heart blocker. Without it, I'm not going to get too wacky. His bluff raising fish is a little bit dicey, even in spots where I suspect they've got a lot of weak hands. As they just can't be guaranteed to fold them. If I had a bit more going on to keep my frequencies from getting out of whack and to make my hands have a bit better removal to the strong hands that are obviously going to calm me down, I think I might ship it in. Like if I had that hand with the king of hearts, I'd put my chips in the middle just based on his line being weak and his sizing being awfully weak. But with no relevant removal and against a fishy player, I'm not going to go too wild with river bluff raises. Lower right-hand table, we have a recreational player limp under the gun. Another suspected recreational player limps behind him on the cutoff. We just check in our big blind with 8-4. That rec then goes and bets 2x pot on Jack 5-5 when it checks around. We're very happy to fold all kinds of hands, especially hands like 8 high, no real relevant equity or draws whatsoever. Happy to fold and find another spot to play instead. Blind on blind, we're going to go ahead and open King 4 suited against a recreational player. That's a pretty standard open. I don't know how widely I'd be expanding my range against a guy like this. I might expand with the suited cards, but not some of the middling small offsuit connectors, just because those are going to be tough to play against a guy that calls a lot. He's not going to 3-bet me anywhere near often enough. I'm going to get to the flop plenty, but I still don't want to play hands like 5-4 offsuit out of position against a guy that's not folding much pre-flop. On the turn, We've checked range on the flop on that monotone flop. On the turn, I'm just going to go ahead and start overbetting. I don't overbet too much on monotone boards or three flush boards, but against a fishy type player where he can just get way too sticky with that 10x, as an exploit, I'm going to go ahead and overbet him and hope he hit that 10 or some other piece that doesn't want to go somewhere, and I can start getting lots of money in with my flush. Recreational player limps under the gun, the upper left-hand table. We're going to go ahead and isolate him with something like our typical cutoff raise first in range, about a 28% raise first in range. Ace-Jack offsuit's going to be in there. Probably offsuit aces as weak as maybe Ace-9 offsuit. We get an 8-4 deuce two-tone board. We do have the relevant backdoor nut flush draw and blocker. We're going to go ahead and range bet him small on a board he's not likely to have very many good hands on, and he folds instantly. Lower right-hand table, we open Queen 10 suited under the gun. We got called all over the place by a rec in position, a rec from the small blind, and a kind of a loose reg-type player in the big blind. With all these players out there without position, we're going to go ahead and check range. We're going to open King 10 suited or King 10 offsuit from the cutoff in the upper left-hand table. Upper right-hand table, we checked in the big blind against limpers with 10-5 offsuit, and we flop top 2. We go ahead and check our range, and the under-the-gun limpers betting out for 2/3 pot. We're going to go ahead and check raise this almost certainly when it comes back around to us. It will come back around to us in one way or another, whether it's for players calling or folding or raising, and we obviously will have some decision to make. Everyone else folds. It's just us. The only hand that really beats us is limped pocket 4s. You know, we block the world as far as 10s and 5s go. He can have overpairs he got tricky with and limped, random 10x, random draws. Check raising is the move here, no doubt, with top 2. We got to feel pretty good about this hand, even in a limp pot. He quickly calls me. The only hands that got there were Queen 10 and pocket queens, which probably aren't going to be a large portion of his range. I'm going to keep betting for value at a 2/3 size. Lower left-hand table facing that large lead, and then the raise, we're just going to fold our gut shot. The river is interesting in that now all the draws bricked off except for Ace-3 and 3-6. Our hand is not super strong at this point. However, he is kind of on the fishy side based on the limp and those quick calls. Those quick calls often mean some kind of hand he wants to get sticky with and not fold. I'm going to get a little bit wacky and overbet this and try to get him to hero me off. I think he can actually hero me off with hands he shouldn't. I don't want to check and induce bluffs because the fish aren't often bluffy enough. And I just have a feeling this guy is more on a showdown value type hand than a draw type hand. He might get too sticky with the 10x, so let's just put him in. About 1.5x pot. He instantly folded, so it didn't work. Perhaps he was on some kind of draw after all. There would be some merit in checking to try to induce a bluff from a draw, although I don't know that fish are all that bluffy after they call a check raise and a bet. Now we've got that same table, upper right-hand table, a short-stacked, half-stack player opens the button 2.5x. I really can't give him the option to 4-bet small, so I'm going to treat my 3-bet more like a cold 4-bet. I'm obviously going to stack off queens. I'm going to be stacking off at least 10s or better, maybe even 9s or better because he's short. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this up. Let's see here. What kind of bluffing ratio do I want to have? Probably about a 50-50 bluffing ratio, given the stack sizes that are at play. Yeah, so I can raise up let me see here. I'm not even sure because it's so rare that I find a way where I can, cold 4-bet or 3-bet to call off pocket 9s. I can probably get as aggressive as 9s plus any suited Broadway, ace king, ace queen, and even the suited wheel aces, where I'm going to be calling off 9s or better, and I'm going to be calling off ace king, and I'll fold the suited Broadways, the suited wheel aces, and ace queen offsuit I can fold as well. I fold ace queen suited also. I think an approach like that's pretty reasonable. If that's a bit too loose, you want to go 10s or better. Maybe then you don't bluff with the suited aces, and maybe you dump a couple of suited Broadways out of there as well. Something like that's a pretty reasonable way to approach that spot, if you ask me. Okay. Upper left-hand table, some more crazy action. We got a recreational player limping, another, a loose passive recreational player isolates him to 5, and then we have a small blind cold call. I'm going to pretty much treat this, again, like a cold 4-bet or fold spot. And I'm going to be awful tight with my bluffs, just given how much money's starting to get in there already. I'm going to treat it, I'm not even going to have a 50-50 ratio. It's going to be more like a 60-40 or 70-30. I'm going to go about 60-40. I'm going to use ace-jack suited as a bluff in this spot. I'm going to have queens plus ace-king to call off. I probably also got pocket jacks and then ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, king-jacks, the suited varieties of them. This one was kind of on the cusp, and it didn't work out this time, so I'm just going to go ahead and fold out. But I think the approach is correct there. If you want to tell me that using ace-jack as a bluff is a bit too loose and I shouldn't have quite as many bluffs, that's a fair argument and one we could have, but I think the approach is correct. Yeah, I could maybe split the difference and not use king-jack like I would use in the 70-30 value to bluff ratio, but use ace-jack. I think that hand's probably right around the cusp of whether I fold it or I bluff raise with it pre-flop. Lower left-hand table, 10-7 suited is a bit too loose to be opening from middle position. We do have a suspected rec in the big blind, which would perhaps give me some more incentive to do it. However, 10-7 suited is more like the bottom of a cutoff opening range. I don't want to start throwing into a middle position open range all that often. And when the suspected rec limps the small blind on blind, we're going to go ahead and isolate pretty liberally, probably like a button open range, low to mid 40%, including all pocket pairs, even pocket deuces. Upper left-hand table, king 10 offsuit is going to be an open from middle position. And in the upper right-hand table, a suspected recreational player with a half stack limps from middle position. We're going to go ahead and isolate on the cutoff with something like a middle position raise first in range. Jack 9 suited is going to be a part of that. I think it's a very fine hand to isolate with. Lower left-hand table, suspected rec who's been loose and active opens for 3x in the cutoff. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet the button pretty aggressively, probably about a 13% range, including that queen 10 suited hand right there. All suited broadways are good, probably even the suited 9x like queen 9, jack 9, 10, 9. Upper right-hand table, we get flatted by the button, flatted by the big blind, who is also probably a rec given that he's playing pretty loose, pretty active on a short stack. And then the limping player jams over the top all in, nothing to do but fold our jack 9 there. And just keep an eye on the fact that this guy's been limp jamming and, maybe adjust if we're worried he's going to limp jam or limp re-raise a bit too often. This player right here playing 64-9 with 67% limps over 11 hands has also shown me enough to call him a recreational player too, even though he's playing on a full stack. So the upper right-hand table looks pretty good. The upper left-hand table's got some active fishy recs. We have position on a rec on the lower left-hand table, and there's at least one rec on the lower right-hand table. So for now, these tables all seem pretty promising and no reason to change anything. And here we get the rec limps, player limps behind, the button rec limps, the small blind completes. I'm going to check in with the Queen 4 suited and get into effectively what's a family pot, as this guy right in here in the 3 seat was not dealt in. All 5 players are in. And we're going to check range in our big blind on this Queen Deuce 6 two-tone board and see how the hand develops. We have top pair, but it's a weak top pair without a whole lot in the way of backdoor equity, so a lot of flop action can actually push us off this right off the bat. Upper left-hand table, recreational player limps. A regular type player isolates in the cutoff against the Rex middle position limp. We're going to be using, once again, something kind of like a cold 4-bet or fold type range there, as we're going to be 3-betting them pretty large. Pocket deuce is just not a hand we want to have there in that situation. A player who's been very, very aggressive bets about 75% on this Queen 6 Deuce two-tone. Because he's so aggressive, I'm really not that worried about the size up. I'm going to go ahead and call this at least once. He's also pretty short. He can't do too much damage with this if this hand keeps getting barreled. Given that he limped the button, he's a wreck, he's been limping a lot, he could have all kinds of weird, wacky nonsense in his range. I'm going to check to him again and allow some of that weird, wacky nonsense to try to stab the river. Not going to try to value bet against a better hand. This is just going to be a snap call all day long. And he's got Queen 5, so we're chopping when the river pair and that jack counterfeits both of our kickers, but I think that's a very reasonable way to play that hand. I think on the river, checking to induce with our, top pair no kicker is much, much better play than trying to, value bet him and hope he hits some other weaker pair that will pay us off. Just given what I think about the composition of his range, given the pre-flop limp, the flop bet to me doesn't necessarily denote that he connected with that flop because he's been so aggressive, an 89% aggression frequency thus far. He's betting pretty much whenever you give the guy the chance to, which means he's betting all kinds of weird nonsense that he does start with pre-flop. So I definitely think checking the river to induce the bluff is going to be much more profitable, at least from an exploitive standpoint. Facing a recreational limp in the lower left-hand table from the button. We're not going to bother completing the small blind with 4 deuce off. It is just such a weak hand. I almost never call on the button for a 3x open. Had this loose recreational player gotten to the pot and I had a chance to call on the button with pocket 4s where I could hit a set, I might have come along as an exploit. Against that 3x RFI, just because of how bad the rake tends to be, even in games as high as 200 no limit, I mostly do not call on the button, especially against a 3x or larger open. I might have deviated there had the recreational player and the cutoff come along just because I have a chance to make a huge hand and take a stack because, he's over 100 blinds deep and we can actually get paid off. But in general, you don't want to be calling on the button. But I might have done it there had this guy come along just because we're trying to go after him. Lower right-hand table, we raise the cutoff first in. We get 3-bet a pretty large size by the big blind. Pretty sure this is a hand we can go ahead and fold. If I thought this player was sufficiently aggressive the way a solver would be, I think I would go ahead and defend it. Given that the pool is a little bit tighter than solvers, they don't 3-bet quite enough, especially out of their big blind. I think we can go ahead and fold a couple of pairs. I'm going to let the deuces go. It's pretty close. If you wanted to call it or if you thought this guy was sufficiently aggressive enough that justified playing a full solver-approved GTO type 3-bet defense range, I would hear that argument, but I think it's okay to fold it too. It's probably pretty marginal at best. Upper left-hand table, we open ace-queen offsuit from middle position. Something like a 22% raise first in range in that spot. Probably not expanding too much with the loose recreational player in position that's going to be calling me all the time. But a hand like ace-queen, of course, we're trying to get in that pot. We're in a check range, multi-way, 4-player pot, 2 players in position to us. I'm pretty much checking everything on that flop. If you want to bet some hands, you know, the small overpairs are the best ones because they can get some value from worse ace-x, a hand like pocket sevens, 8-7, 6-5. And they also need to deny some equity from, you know, stuff like king-queen that got in there. Against the player's bet, I've got no back doors. It looks like he bet, I think it was about 2/3 on that flop. You know, I lost track of the bet sizing, but I'm really not calling ace-queen high multi-way there with no back doors regardless of the bet size. And it's okay to go ahead and fold that. This situation's a lot like that ace-jack suited hand where I 3-bet before and had a fold out when this guy jammed. Ace-jack offsuit, of course, is not even in consideration for being put in that spot. But I'd probably be stacking off given that he isolated from the button. He's passive, so jacks are kind of on the cusp if I want to stack off with jacks or not. But queens plus ace-king for sure, maybe jacks, then mix in some suited broadways or maybe ace-queen offsuit as some bluffs to go along with it. Lower right-hand table, the button raises first in. Our small blind, we are not going to defend. You know, we're not going to call anything there, and we're not going to 3-bet with 10-7 suited. We just have bigger and better hands to defend with. If we're using that hand, we're just 3-betting far too many. Even something like a 15% 3-bet range in that spot, 10-7 suited does not need to be a part of it. If you're using that hand, you're either using that at the expense of hands that are better choices, you know, bigger hands, you know, with more equity, or you're just 3-betting far too many hands, and you're gonna be exploited by players that can just call you or start 4-betting you. So I think you can just let that one go. We are, however, opening king-8 suited on the button on that table, the lower right-hand table. Lower left-hand table, jack-8 suited is a standard open from middle position. Actually, it's not necessarily a standard open. It's probably right on the cusp of being a standard open. We're going to go ahead and do it. I didn't think this through. I was just assuming it was a standard open when it's really more on the cusp. I spoke too quickly. That's, if anything, it's a bit of a mistake. But these players behind me have been reasonably tight and reasonably passive, so I think it'd be justified. However, I did in fact get 3-bet this particular time. We're going to go ahead and fold it. We've got a limp and then a middle position raise. This guy, given he's been loose and active, I wouldn't 3-bet quite this wide normally. I would normally 3-bet against the middle position isolation range with something like the 3-bet range that I use against the under the gun raise first in. Because this guy's been loose and active, I think he's got too many hands in his range pre-flop. He's probably isolating the limper a bit too wide. I'm going to go ahead and 3-bet him a bit wider than I otherwise normally would. You know, and I'm going to throw in a hand like queen 10 suited, jack 10 suited, ace jack offsuit. Those hands are kind of on the cusp that I wouldn't normally include in the 3-bet range, but in this particular spot I'm going to be slightly wider and use them. We are going to go ahead and range bet on the king 3-3 two-tone flop. You know, I can have aces, kings, ace, king, king, queen, the suited versions of queen, jack, queen 10, and a lot of different flush draw type hands. Now I can have aces full, kings full. I think I trapped my aces full. I probably started keep betting my kings full. Let me see here. I'm trying to think. I don't know if I really want to bet this gut shot. I think I want to bet some of my suited gut shots, but not all of them. I've got queen jack, queen 10, jack 10. And I'm really not betting that much on this particular turn. I'm going to go ahead and check this one back and not get too wild with it. I am, however, going to make a play at him on the river. I've got trapped aces, like I said, that can certainly bet. This is going to be one of my worst, and I've also got pocket nines now that can certainly bet and bet large. So I've got 6 nutted value combos, even if I don't trap any of my kings full, which means I can certainly have some bluffs. Jack 10 is really my worst combo that's left as far as high card, unpaired high card hands go. So I think I'm going to use that as my all-in bluff to balance my aces full and my nines full that I checked back. Up here in the upper right-hand table, the flop checks around. I think this is a wonderful spot to check raise all in as a bluff. I block some of his better aces I think I would rather do it with the spades though, or with the hearts. I think my heart combos are going to be my best combos because that blocks his ace x of heart. That's ace jack, ace 10, ace queen of hearts that check call. I'm going to let this one go, but I am going to bluff raise a few combos there, believe it or not, just because I can have the aces and nines, and it's hard for him to really have those unless he stumbled into nines himself. Upper right-hand table, trying to get a bit more value there out of my, king second kicker. Flop check through. We checked range out of position on the turn. We started betting half pot with our top pair, good kicker. We got hero called by pocket eights, which is not unreasonable as a bluff catcher. It just depends on if he thinks I'm too bluffy there or not multi-way. Yeah, going back to that 3-3 king ace 9 run out, I'm trying to think when he block bets that river real small. I'm of course shipping the money all in with my aces and my nines, my aces that trapped the turn and my nines that rivered that full house. And I want to put his ace x hands in a bad spot by going all in, and I want to throw a few bluffs into there. I've only got 6 value combos. I really don't want to have really any more than probably about 3 bluff combos at that point, if even that. And I'm going to prioritize the best blockers I can find, so I want to have removal to his best suited aces that will, be backdoor flush draws on the flop that check, call, and float me, then pair up on the turn. I think the best suited aces that I'm trying to target are ace queen, ace jack, and ace 10, so I'm going to use my queen jack, queen 10, and jack 10 of hearts that I checked back on the turn as my bluff raises. I think that's a reasonable way to construct a river bluff raising range that's going to look super strong. I don't want to do it with too many combos. I get myself in trouble if I start that, but I definitely think I want to have a few in there just because it looks so strong. His range is pretty clearly defined to an ace-x type hand. Now on the river here, after we went bet check, I'm going to go ahead and my king high has a smidge of showdown value. I'm not really going to fold out any ace high or pairs very often. I'm just going to go ahead and take my showdown with king high when that board pairs up. Upper right-hand table, I range bet after raising first in with ace-3 suited under the gun, and I range bet the jack-6-5 two-tone. The 6 turn is not a great card for me as I don't really have very many 6x hands, just some ace-6 suited really in that formation. So I'm going to be betting my ace-6 and my 5s full pretty hard. I'm going to be checking back pretty much everything else. I'm just going to be, because I've got so little value, I'm really only going to be betting my... don't really have straight draws very much under the gun either, so I'm just going to be betting some of my bigger flush draws like king, queen, king 10, queen 10, king 9 type stuff to go along with my big monster hands, my trips or my underfool. I'm going to check back the ace 3. Now on the river, I've got trap 6s and 7s that got there and trap jacks. Against that 2/3 size, I'm not going to have too many bluff raises in this particular formation. This player is loose and aggressive and probably has some weak nonsense in his range. I'll find a few bluff raises. Ace-3 doesn't seem to be a good one, though. I think I'd rather have an 8. I block 8-9. I block 8-4 if he somehow got there with that. It blocks some 8-6 kind of hands. I think I would be using ace-8 as a bluff raise in this spot to go with my quad 6s and my 7s full and jacks full that either trapped the turn or got there on the river. I don't think I need to use ace-3 for a bluff raise in that spot. I think I'm going to start getting too wacky if I do that. I'm also not really sure how much these recreational type players are really folding the river raises, even though I do think this guy probably has a lot of middling hands in his range just because he's so aggressive and so loose pre-flop. We check in against some limpers in the upper right-hand table. We have a gut shot, a backdoor flush draw. We're going to just go ahead and check the big blind, check our range. Probably not get too heavily involved if anybody shows too much interest, but if people check around, we're going to start stabbing at an awful lot of turns, especially with this hand that's got some equity and some draw about it. Short stack player. I don't really want to start bluff raising this guy because he's so short. Well, actually, that may not necessarily be true. There's a lot of cards that are good for me on the turn. Nines, hearts, give me a lot more equity that I can just go ahead and jam him. And he's been pretty loose and pretty aggressive pre-flop, so he may stab with all kinds of stupid stuff that folds to a check raise. I think it's worth taking a stab at this guy. I just hit my best card for me that doesn't actually give me a straight, so now I just want to go ahead and put this guy all in, as now I've got an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw. He snap calls with Jack-10 with the stone cold nuts, so what I thought was the best card for me actually guaranteed he never folds. I think that's a reasonable way to play that hand, though, based on my assessment, even though we ran into a gut shot that should have never called the flop check raise, and then he accidentally turned gin on a card that we thought was good for us, but just got us into a lot of trouble. That's the way poker goes sometimes. I don't feel bad about that, and I assure you I'll sleep just fine tonight. No, I will not be bothered by that hand one iota. Upper left-hand table, we're going to open sevens for middle position. Lower left-hand table, we're going to raise up the blind-on-blind limper with our ace-10 offsuit. Both are fairly standard. We're going to check range in the upper left-hand table for the recreational player that called in position on 8-5 deuce two-tone. Turn is our set. We're going to go ahead and start overbetting, hoping this guy has something he doesn't want to let go of and get some value in with our 7. Now, when the ace gets there, he could actually have some ace-x type hands, ace of clubs or ace of hearts floats that, got there, quote-unquote, on the river. I'm going to go ahead and bet this guy strong again. I'm not that worried this guy's got 6-9, 6-4, or 4-3 for a set. I want to go ahead and just try to get big value with a monster hand when if he's backed into that ace somehow, he's not folding. My plan worked in that I got called and called quickly. We'll take a look at what he had in just a minute, but my hand is good. So we end up getting an awful lot of value there with 2 overbets with that set, which I'm, of course, quite happy about. And he had ace-jack of diamonds, so aside from the reasonable aces he could float the turn with, he called with 2 overcards and no draw versus an overbet on a coordinated board. I think the turn is where he got himself in some trouble. It's a reasonable bluff-catching hand on the river to some extent, although it doesn't really block the true lock hands, the various straights. He didn't have any kind of removal to straights that could theoretically be in my range. But the turn is really where the big mistake was for him, calling the overbet on the turn with 2 overcards and no draw on a coordinated board. I think that's awfully questionable. And that's where he got himself into trouble, and that's where our profit came from that time. Blind on blind, it's against that same guy who just got awfully loose and sticky. 7-6 offsuit is about the bottom of my standard blind on blind open range. However, because this guy seems to be so loose and so sticky, my fold equity is going to be entirely too weak. I'm going to go ahead and deviate and play this spot tighter and let one of the weakest hands in my opening range, in my standard opening range for that spot. I'm just going to go ahead and let it go. Ace-6 offsuit's an easy fold, the lower left-hand table under the gun. Same with 5-4 offsuit under the gun on the upper right-hand table. Lower right-hand table will open King-Jack offsuit under the gun. We open a few offsuit Broadway cards under the gun. Not too many, but King-Jack is very reasonable to do. I'd probably fold King-10 mostly, fold Queen-Jack mostly. Those hands are kind of mixed. I mostly fold them, but you could open them as well. But King-Jack, for the most part, I'm going to open. Facing a 3-bet from the button, I'm going to be very tight against in-position 3-bets, particularly when I'm opening from under the gun. King-Jack offsuit is just an absolute very easy fold under the circumstances. Lower left-hand table, blind on blind. We have 7-3 suited facing a 3x open. I mostly defend with pretty much all my suited combos, raising a few of the connectors and a few of just the random kind of janky Queen 3 suited kind of hands. We'll go ahead and call with 7-3 suited. Lower right-hand table, we're going to check in against the button limp and the small blind complete with Ace-7 off. And on the lower, there's the lower right-hand table. On the lower left-hand table, facing the pot size continuation bet, we have 7 high, no draw, and we just get rid of our hand, fold it out. We check range in the big blind on this Queen-9 deuce two-tone board on the lower right-hand table. And we're going to fold with no real backdoor equity against that pot size bet. Upper right-hand table, we get a limp and then a 3x isolation raise. We're just going to go ahead and fold from the big blind. That's going to be mostly a 3-better fold spot. Given the sizing small and that the recreational player probably will just limp call or limp fold as opposed to limp raise a lot of the time, we can actually call some of there, but with the player behind me not closing the action, that could either squeeze me out after he limped with the limp re-raise, or he can call and make me play out of position against 2 players post-flop. I'm going to be a lot tighter than I otherwise would from the big blind. Lower right-hand table, the recreational player limps from middle position. We're going to go ahead and isolate on the button with something like a 28% range, which of course includes King-Queen offsuit. Lower left-hand table, we're going to raise first in from the button, at least a 40-45% range like a solver would approve. I'm probably a bit wider because the big blind's been very tight and passive so far. Lower right-hand table, Ace-5-8 two-tone. We're going to go ahead and bet range small. In the lower left-hand table, we faced a check raise to 4x from the small blind. We don't know very much about this player, so we're just going to treat it like a very standard situation. When the small blind goes ahead and 4-bets us, we're going to go ahead and 4-bet and call off with queens plus ace-king and maybe use a hand like ace-jack offsuit as our bluff because we can actually call ace-queen there in position. Upper right-hand table with all these limps, we're going to go ahead and complete the small blind with Jack-8 of diamonds. And now we're going to check our range on the flop with 5 players out there. Lower right-hand table, we actually banged off second pair. He overbets into us. That is probably pretty strong from a fish. Upper right-hand table against a 3/4 bet and then the button call. I'm just going to go ahead and call with my flush draw and check again. I'm going to raise ace-king and 9s from the cutoff on those left-hand tables. I'm going to think about what to do here against this large bet from the fish. Usually fish bets are pretty large, pretty nutty or pretty strong when they're overbetting. And I'm going to go ahead and fold to that second barrel with the jack high. No other way out of that hand. Let's see, fish to preflop caller. These small overbets trend to be underbluffed. Flush closing rivers tend to be underbluff. Ace high flops. That's just underbluff trends all over the place. I'm going to go ahead and let them have it. It is a good bluff catcher that it's second pair with the backdoor nut flush that came in, the nut flush blocker. However, I just don't think that that guy is going to be aggressive enough that it really justifies bluff catching. So I'm just going to go ahead and let that go. I can have some spades that check back the turn that have showdown value in my range that I can raise with. I've got some ace-x that didn't bet the turn. I've got other hands that can call that as well, so I'm not worried. Lower left-hand table, we 4-bet against the 3-bet with our ace-king suited. We got flatted on a queen-5 deuce two-tone. We're going to go ahead and range bet small. Recreational player in the upper left-hand table bets the river after calling pre-flop, and that board checks all the way through. That's pretty reasonably bluffy, even with that texture. It's probably pretty close. I'm going to call it just because it's such a bluffy texture, or just such a bluffy line, rather, only betting on the river. I'm not good all that often here. I run into the nuts, but I think it's okay. Here we've got the nut flush draw, 2 overcards. We've got to call 70, into we're getting about 2 to 1. This is a very trivial call with the flush draw. Could be against an overpair that trapped or a set, but we're so very live we have to call off there, and we banged off our flush and did him dirty, got there and won the pot. So I'm okay with that, even though he's a bit on the passive side. I probably am not going to call him down there too lightly just because he's been pretty passive, but when I've got 2 overcards and that flush draw getting 2 to 1 in a 4-bet pot, there's really not much of a decision to be had. Upper right-hand table, we open king-8 suited from the cutoff. We get called by the button and the big blind. We're going to go ahead and check range with the player in position to us in a multi-way pot on the ace-5 deuce two-tone board. We'll be folding to any kind of bet from anybody there on the flop with no real equity or backdoor equity. Now that turn hits and nobody's bet the flop, meaning there's not too much ace or too much spade draw out there, probably not a lot of 3s in people's range pre-flop, I'm going to go ahead and start stabbing at that. Folded up the button. And now the river is interesting in that, especially with the ace tripping up. I'm never folding out a 3. I'm not often folding out trip aces on that. And the only thing I can really fold out by bluffing is middling pairs, but I beat all the other draws except for a few better king-high flush draws. I think there's probably more merit in just trying to show this down than actually bluffing on that particular river card. I'm going to take my showdown with king-high. Lost to a pair of 5s, might be able to bluff that off if I fire again, but you never know. A guy playing queen-5 isn't known for making sound decisions, so even though he should fold that, maybe he does not. Hard to say. This table broke, so we're going to shuffle it out. Try to replace it with another one. Lower left-hand table, a regular type player opens the button for a 2.5x. We're just going to use a standard response from our big blind, which involves 3-betting about 14% of hands. Pairs probably about 8 or better. All my suited connectors 5-4 or better. All my suited broadways, suited 9x type hands, a few suited hands like Jack-8, 10-8. A few suited wheel aces, ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen offsuit should get us there. On the king-deuce-deuce board, I'm going to go ahead and range bet small. I've got aces, kings, ace-king, king-queen, king-jack, king-10, king-9 suited, and the king-queen offsuit. He's got to go ahead and call it lots of middling pairs. On that 3 of clubs turn, I guess I have some 4-5 and some 5-6 for straight draws, as well as ace-4, ace-5. I've got a variety of club draws. I've got a decent number of draws. I don't really have too many pat hands. I don't have too many pat hands. I don't have too many lock hands. I don't really have 3s full. I don't have any quad 2s or 2x. King's full can trap, obviously. I'm going to be checking an awful lot on this board. I think I want to keep betting aces. And perhaps ace-king, and then some but not all on my flush draws, because I'm going to be betting far too many draws if I bet them. I don't really have any draws with pairs, so I'm going to be actually calling a lot of my nut flush draws, I think. On the river here, when this checks back, I feel like I can have so much air in my range that is, in fact, going to bluff. Queen is a pretty good thinner value bet hand, but I feel it's probably pretty mandatory. It blocks king-queen, his best call-down hand that actually has me beat. I get called by hands like pocket 8s, pocket 9s here an awful lot, I think, too, so I'm fine going ahead to bet this, try to get hero called by a very reasonable middle pairs that could be in his range. And I, of course, do have my king's fool type hands that trapped. I probably don't have my aces. Those probably keep betting just because they don't really block the kings, and they're going to be good almost all the time. They also block his ace-deuce that could have actually called pre-flop as well that would have me beat. So I think aces aren't really a trap. But kings full are in my range. A lot of king X that doesn't bet the turn. I'm not sure how I split my king X on that turn. I'm sure I bet some of it and check some of it. And then I've got these pairs worse than a king, some of which can value bet. Queens can value bet for sure. I think I would value bet jacks. 10s, 9s, and 8s are closer. I think I check 8s and 9s. I probably bet 10s. Maybe I check 10s. I'm not entirely sure. I think that one's pretty close. Upper left-hand table, we are going to open 5-4 suited on the button. That's a pretty standard open. Got a recreational player in the small blind. We're happy to get into a pot with him, 150 blinds deep in position. The big blind has reg-type stats, but it's playing on a short stack, so I'm not entirely sure what to think about that. Now he goes and he min 3-bets me from 2.5 to 5 in a squeeze scenario, so I'm more inclined to think this guy is not that good, regardless of what hand he's holding. We're, of course, coming along with 5-4 suited for that price, looking to play a deceptive hand that can make some strong straights or some pretty decent flushes post-flop. Of course, that board doesn't really hit us very well, so we're just going to be content to get out of the way when anybody starts betting at this pot. We're not going to stab ourselves either. I'd be stabbing with my sets, probably some good ace-x, some good naked clubs, like I'm going to have some hands like king-queen, king-jack, king-9 of clubs. I'm calling pretty much everything pre-flop against that goofy sizing that he used. A hand like 5-high, no draw, I think is a fine one to just be checking back and plan to fold at some point. Maybe I'll stab eventually if nobody shows any desire to win this pot, just because it's one of my absolute worst hands, if not my worst possible hand I've got here. But I expect somebody to bet at some point in time. They'll just happily fold. Yeah, I'm going to fold even against a small bet. Lower right-hand table, 8-7 suited, a little bit on the loose side to isolate, but I've got 2 weak recreational players already limping, another rec in the small blind, and it appears to be a rec in the big blind as well, as he's playing short, and he's limped plenty as well. So I'm going to go ahead and deviate and isolate a bit wider than I might otherwise do that, just to try to either pick up all that money that's out there or get into a pot against some weaker players with a hand that still plays pretty well. Lower left-hand table, we called the min raise from the button to the big blind with queen 10 opposite. I think that's pretty straightforward. Flop checks through, and now we turn the queen. I'm just going to go ahead and bet at him small and look to value bet the river for kind of a standard size if he calls me. Against that little min raise back, I'm, of course, going to call with my top pair. I'm going to check to him now, having hit 2 pair. Upper right-hand table, I'm going to isolate with ace-jack. Lower right-hand table, I'm going to go ahead and range bet small on that 4-3 deuce two-tone board. Had I picked up a spade, I'd probably overbet jam the turn. On the offsuit king, I'm just going to go ahead and check back. Deuce on the river. Going to see what he does, but I'm going to turn this into a bluff if he checks. Any king X, any 2X that got there, I don't want to let him call easily with his pairs. I'm just going to go ahead and move this guy all in. There's 20 blinds in the pot. He's got 33 behind, so we're just going to put him all in for a little more than a pot and a half. 8 high, force him to hero call me with ace-4, make him stumble into a king. I don't beat anything at this point with 8 high, so I really want to bluff it for sure. He's thinking about it, which I don't like, but the decision's already made, and the decision really isn't much of a decision. We've got to bluff this hand. I guess there might be some merit to betting smaller, but I think I like the overbet all in here just to make so much of his range fold out and pick up that pot a very large percentage of the time. I think a lot of his middling pair hands that actually will consider calling bets, period, are much more inclined to call the small bet as opposed to the overbet, whereas the overbet folds out pretty much anything he didn't like trap with that's super strong, like if he stumbles into a trap boat or he made a straight somehow, or if he hit the trip twos, he's going to call, or if he hit the king, he might call. But a lot of those hands that coordinate with that small flop are going to fold versus the overbet. Lower left-hand table, we raised middle position with the ace-5 suited, checked range against the recreational player on queen-jack-3 two-tone. He checks back. We get an offsuit 8. We have the nut flush draw. I'm going to bet the nut flush draw large for an overbet in case I hit that hard. I want to be using a very large sizing here as well. We have about 6x pot behind us, so I don't really want to go ahead and jam. A lot of times we'll just jam with nut flush or nut flush blockers on 3 flush boards that don't have a pair on them. Given that we're so deep, I want to give myself a chance to actually get paid. This guy got sticky with goofball hands before. Actually, there's 4 to the straight. If he's got the 10, I bet he can't fold this. I'm going to go ahead and just try to jam this all in and really try to do him dirty when I've got the nut flush draw and he could be sitting on some kind of stupid straight that he backed into. If it wasn't the chance for him to have so many 10x hands that probably are going to fold or probably not going to fold to any bet size, I would use more like a 2x overbet there to try to get called off by some more reasonable holdings on a more reasonable size overbet. But when I think that this guy who's shown himself to be super sticky and he could find a way to back into so many stupid 10x hands that he just is going to have a hard time folding for any bet, I want to take a chance to really get those 150 blinds off him while I've got the stone cold nuts and he might not be able to get away. We checked the big blind, then checked range with this Jack-8 deuce rainbow board. We've got ace-5 suited again with the nut flush draw. We're going to go ahead and start stabbing. We're going to be stabbing very aggressively with nobody showing any interest on that flop. Against the river here, I don't really think this guy folds pairs to me, and I think that I beat a lot of his weird straight draws and gut shots. I'm going to try to check down my ace-high. If I didn't have any showdown value, I think I would just give up. I'm trying to decide if there's any merit towards bluff catching against this guy. He hasn't been that aggressive. I think I could just go ahead and fold that one. You know, he can have lots of pairs or even trip deuces or something like that. I'm going to occasionally fold into a hand like queen 10, 9, 10. But I think he's probably got a lot of stuff in his range that is actually pretty decent when he sizes up more appropriately. For a smaller bet, I probably talk myself into calling a half pot, a 1/3 type bet, something like that. We open blind on blind with the ace-7 on the and we check range on the 9-8-6 two-tone. 7 on the turn gives us a marginal pair on a 4 straight board, so I'm not going to be betting it, trying to bluff him off better. I'm not going to be semi-bluffing, or I'm not going to be trying to value bet to get him to call with worse. Just going to keep checking, try to get towards showdown. I'm not going to really call here when he bets, looks like a 75% pot bet there on that 4 straight board. I'm content to just fold that one and find better spots against this guy. Fold that queen 4 in the small blind. And I was going to fold the 8-4 off in the small blind anyway, even unopened. That player in the big blind's been passive, but only through 2 orbits. Not enough to tell me he's so passive I can just start robbing them with the 8-4 offsuit, even in a blind down blind spot. Lower left-hand table, we're going to open pocket jacks from the button. I might expand my range with the guy who's been on the tight side so far. Both the blinds have been on the tight side and the passive side so far through the first couple of orbits. And we're going to fold. Well, we've got 2 recreational players in this pot for a 3x open. I'm actually going to go ahead and call with this 5s on the button. The lower left-hand table against that small blind, 4.5x 3-bet. I'm not going to 4-bet jacks and get them in. If I knew this guy was sufficiently aggressive, I could do that. I think because the pool is a bit tighter and this guy hasn't shown himself to be particularly aggressive as of yet, it's fine. Just go ahead and flat call these and play in position. And we get about a 40% continuation bet from the under-the-gun recreational player. We're going to go ahead and call with our pair of 5s. That's also a gut shot and better than anything except the aces. We're going to call this 1/3 bet from the apparently reg or tight reg type player in this blind versus button 3-bet scenario. With second pair, just, a pocket pair that beats everything except the top pair. We could be betting some jacks on this turn, but jacks with Jack-Jack, some jack straight draws that we back into, but Jack-Jack with the pair of jacks even doesn't block his strong hands all that well, and we also have plenty of showdown value. I'm going to go ahead and check this back. I'm going to fold to the second barrel with the fives. Actually, against the recreational player, I think I can actually call a second barrel for about 75%. I think that's pretty close. If I hit a 3 or a 5, I'm looking to get value. He might check down and give up his bluffs. He probably doesn't have that many bluffs. But we'll check down the fives here. Oh, and he made second pair, which is a shame, but I think it's okay the way I play that hand, if not great. Trying to decide if there's any merit in raising this jack's hand on the river. Probably not a ton of merit in doing that, as I do actually then end up getting stacked by his ace-jack hands. He shouldn't have too many of those, but he'll have them some. I don't know that he calls me down with too many others. He could be trying to value bet thin. I'm just gonna flat him. It's close. I'm just gonna flat him. It's more interesting if he actually overbet jams me all in there in that spot. I think that makes the hand a lot more interesting. I mean, I'm still going to call with the jacks, of course, but especially if he's going to use an ace-x hand as a bluff, which is a reasonable hand to use as a bluff on that particular run-out. But it blocks ace-jack so well that I think he could go ahead and do that. I think I wouldn't mind an overbet jam bluff from that guy in that spot right there. But that's not something you see from all the players in the player pool. That's not a real common thing. Some players don't have it in their repertoire at all. 2.5x open from under, or actually it's from middle position with the player sitting out. We do get a call from the small blind, but he's fishy. Queen 8 suited, we can certainly go ahead and defend this even with the overcaller. We're going to check range to the raise first in player from middle position. Hope he bets, hope the small blind calls, and we can start blasting away, check raising with our top two. Now that the flop checks through and it checks to us on the turn, the jack does coordinate and make some better two pairs, and 9-10 is now a straight, but our hand is still very strong, and no one has shown any reason to think it's beat, so of course we're going to start betting out, try to get some value in there. We get called in two spots, and we just filled up, which is obviously a great spot to be in. A straight doesn't get away. A queen does not get away. We only lose to queen-jack at this point. I think I want to go ahead and overbet, even with a couple of players out there. I'm just going to go ahead and put a 2x pot bet in here and hope I can get hero called down by something else that beats me, because our hand is just so strong, beats almost everything. And I screwed up and didn't stab at this pot on the turn here, but I am going to start bluffing with my 8 high on the river just because I can fold out all kinds of other stupid high card hands that beat me but can't call, even though I know this guy is loose and probably sticky. And I had that hand where I jammed at him for that massive overbet with the flush on the 4 straight board. Still, I can't be in the business of checking down 8 high. I've got to take a stab at it. Lower right-hand table, we open 7-5 suited, and we get a small blind 3-bet to a pretty good size, a 4.5x 3-bet. We can go ahead and defend this, though it's pretty close. One of the weakest defends that we would have versus a 3x open, or versus a 2.5x open, and then the small blind 4.5x 3-bet. We flop second pair, backdoor straight draws, backdoor flush draws, face a 1/3 bet. This is an automatic continue for that bet size. We get a very nice turn card that gives us a flush draw and a gut shot straight draw, so we'll probably be continuing against a bet. We don't really fold out too many better pairs for a single bet right here. I'd rather be bluffing with some 7x or club draws that I floated the flop with that don't have any kind of pair whatsoever. I think this one's a lot more reasonable to check back. King is not a great card as that ace-king, king-queen, king-jack type hands got there. I don't know if he knows enough to bluff all those. If he's going to let me check down my 5, I'm going to be pretty happy to do that. I'm not trying to fold him off a better pair at this point. We end up against pocket 9s and we're beat, but I think that's another reasonably played hand. I guess if you wanted to get more snug because you didn't think that guy was aggressive enough pre-flop and you could fold it pre-flop, I guess that's the only real question so far there. I think the flop, turn, and river are all pretty straightforward. Some of you would bet the turn. That's not the end of the world either. I guess there's some merit to that. Although I feel like if you're betting the turn and he check calls, you really have to barrel off and blast away the river. And then if you're turning, you know, it's not huge showdown value, but there's some degree of showdown value. If you're turning that hand into a call bet bluff type hand, you might be bluffing way too much. So I think the way I played it is good. Although if you wanted to convince me that you should be stabbing the turn in the river with that as well to fold him off better hands like pocket nines, there's at least a debate to be had there. Lower right-hand table, we raise king suited from middle position. The looks like the small blind called us. We're going to go ahead and bet range small on the queen jack 4 two-tone board. I was going to say we could barrel some turn cards, but not the 5 of hearts. We'd be looking to barrel turn cards that give us some kind of straight draw. The 10 is the best card for us. Kings, we probably check back to under-rep our weak pair of kings. Rivers, the ace of hearts with the 4-heart runout. Had he checked to me, I'm going to be looking to bluff that with my king high, no heart, no real showdown value. Against the half-pot bet, I'm curious how bluffy I think this is going to be. He's going to be a recreational player. He's betting. That half-pot bet is pretty bluffy. The check call check bet line is also pretty bluffy. The 4-flush river, however, is not that bluffy. I probably want to have a few bluff raises here, but I'm not sure what they should be. I think I would just be calling an awful lot with any heart, more so than trying to bluff raise a fish in a spot where it's murky. We're going to go ahead and fold that. Upper left-hand table, get a middle position raise, a cutoff re-raise. We're playing cold 4-bet or fold, and 7s is not a part of that, so we're out of there. And we're also going to go ahead and shut down this session after the next orbit or so. Interesting action here in that this short stack big blind overcalled the 3-bet. He really should have just jammed or folded, and then the RFI player immediately 4-bets to 32, and then gets it all in. Gets it all in against the guy with ace-8, and he's got ace-queen, so we've got some wild spazzy action on this table. We're going to open king-10 offsuit from middle position on the lower left-hand table. Got a button limper here with 20 blinds. We're going to check in with king-9 offsuit. We've also got a small blind completer in there. Lower left-hand table, we get 3-bet by the in-position player, and king-10 offsuit is just an easy fold. Lower left-hand table, we go ahead and raise blind on blind with ace-king suited. We check range on the upper right-hand table on that queen-10-9 rainbow board. We've got our gut shot, overcard, and bottom pair. The blind on blind spot, we get 3-bet. We're going to be stacking off at least 10s plus and ace-king, maybe even 9s plus. Ace-king suited, clearly a part of that. You know, some cards that some cards with good removal that can't call the 3-bet, like some suited wheel aces, are going to be 4-bet bluffs. Either ace-queen or ace-jack, depending on how loosely I want to call with the offsuit aces out of position there, are also going to be the 4-bet bluffs. We'll be 4-bet, and he quickly folds. We stab the turn with our bottom pair gut shot overcard. We got quickly called. I don't know that I fold out too much queen X or even too much 10X. I think I'd much rather be bluffing with a naked king or just a jack with no pair than turn my king-9 into a bluff. So I'm going to try to take my showdown here. And we end up actually beating Jack-2 for the straight draw and the flush draw, and whatever the recreational player had on the button, King-3 offsuit. So a hand he really shouldn't have in there, but players with 20 blinds that open limp the button have hands like King-3 offsuit. Not going to open king 5 on the button even if it folds to us. The small blind's been aggressive. The big blind's been tight and reasonably passive, but the small blind's been active. And that hand is a decent bit outside of a standard open range, so we're not going to expand even if we get the chance. Only one table left. We got a couple more hands in the session. Hopefully something else interesting pops up. But it's, so far so good. We end up actually winning thus far about half a buy-in, both in cash and in all-in adjusted equity. So that bad beat we took with the aces in the 4-bet pot against the flush draw was offset by the time that we bad beat aces in the 4-bet pot with the flush draw. Overall, a pretty good session. I got smacked around a little bit more, but I still posted a win, and it still felt like the decisions were pretty good by and large. So I'm pretty happy with things overall. Hope you've enjoyed it thus far, and hope we get a couple more interesting hands here as we wrap up this last table. Five deuce offsuit's going to be a fold from the cutoff. Eight six offsuit's going to be a fold from middle position. And 5-3 offsuit's also a fold under the gun. So that's it for this table. I'm wrapping up now. This is Charlie Murphy signing off. Hope you enjoyed the video.